You're listening to PodCatalyst, the official podcast of IABC, where communicators from around the world tell their stories. Let's get started with today's episode. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to PodCatalyst. Today's episode is guest hosted by Matt Tidwell, International Executive Board member for IABC, and he's joined by Fred Cook, director at USC Annenberg Center for Public Relations. You might recall Fred has been a guest on the podcast in years past, and this time around he's here to share more about the study that USC conducted in partnership with IABC on the future of work, which we released earlier this summer. We've linked to the report in the show notes, and in just a second I'm going to hand it off to Matt to tee this up and talk more about the report. Matt, among a few other board members, was a champion of the work, so I do want to take a moment to thank him for hosting this episode, as well as Fred for joining us on the podcast for a third year in a row. So let's get started with the show.
Hi, my name is Matt Tidwell. I'm on the board of directors for IABC, and I'm on the faculty at the University of Kansas in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication. And I think communications, when it's done well, actually creates organizational direction.
Hi, my name is Fred Cook, and I'm the chairman emeritus of Golin, and I'm the director of the USC Center for Public Relations. And I think in this case, communications creates culture at a corporation.
Hello, welcome everyone to this episode of IABC PodCatalyst. I'm Matt Tidwell hosting the episode today, and so excited to be joined by our guest, Fred Cook. Fred is the director of USC Annenberg School of Communication and Journalism Center for Public Relations. That's such a terrific organization, and they do, I know, a lot of really interesting research and an annual report that they do that's read very widely within our industry. And so all of us at IABC were extremely proud and honored to work with them on a report that we're going to be talking about today. But I know myself and our board of directors and executive director Peter Finn, we're all heavily involved with Annenberg as we put the report together. It looks at the hybrid workplace, and particularly the post-pandemic hybrid workplace, remote workplace that we're all working in. And so that's the topic for today. Fred's going to help us learn a little bit more about that report and what was in it. And so, Fred, welcome to the episode.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, terrific. And I know that you and I saw each other just in June at IABC World Conference because you were kind enough to come to the conference and actually present the study results, research report results to our members. And as I recall, there was so much interest that we were just going to have you do one show. We ended up, you repeated to another, and the rooms were full both times. So a lot of interest in this. But tell us a little bit about the report, and also, in your opinion, why was a study like this needed for the workforce and specifically the communications profession?
Well, it was really an interesting study. We do a lot of research, and this is one of the most interesting research projects we've undertaken. And I think part of it is because it's so relevant and so timely. And so it was great working with you guys, and I loved presenting at your conference. Everybody seemed to be very engaged. Just to give a little background on what we did a survey with internal communications people at major companies. We had about 400 people complete the survey, and we narrowed it down to about 200 respondents we thought were the perfect target, which was a pretty robust group. And we asked them questions about how the hybrid working trend was impacting communications inside their organizations. No one had done this kind of survey before with the people who are responsible for that job. And we found some very interesting results. And I think that a lot of people are, as you said, struggling with how to manage this, whether to get everybody to return to work or remain hybrid, or what's going to happen in the future. We got some real insights into that.
Yeah, no, again, I think the timing was just perfect. And of course, as internal communicators, not all of our membership, but certainly a significant percentage of our membership work in internal communications. I think that's what really is driving the interest, because obviously many times they're the ones that need to communicate kind of the direction in workplace and things like that. I know one of the bigger takeaways from the report is that while most respondents find remote and hybrid work effective, it's ultimately becoming a challenge building corporate culture, and also some other factors like training and morale. But what do you make of this kind of delicate balance there?
Well, that was probably the key finding. We're trying to find out whether having a remote workforce or partially remote workforce impacts your corporate culture. And the people that we surveyed listed that as the number one challenge of hybrid is how do you maintain corporate culture, the first thing. And about 2/3 thought it was either a major challenge or a significant challenge. And then right behind that was training, which is obviously difficult to do when people are not in the same place. So those two things were at the top of the list of the challenges associated with this. But on the other hand, this balancing act was that it looked like the people that were working from home had the highest morale, more than the people who had returned to the office. So from a corporate perspective, organizational perspective, you have to make a decision. Do you want to preserve your corporate culture by having everyone in the office? Or do you want to keep morale high by letting people have that flexibility? Or is there a way to do both? And I think that's the solution that we were looking for.
Yeah, no, very interesting. I think because all of us, as we're looking at workplaces, I happen to work with a lot of young working professionals, right? And so flexibility for them is a real driver. They love that idea of flexibility, but that also means that many times they're preferring, to work remotely. And so, yeah, the challenge of how we create that corporate culture when we've got so much of our workplace really not physically with us becomes really an acute challenge. So that's great. And I know almost half of the respondents indicated that there's some conflict between management and employees with regard to remote work. Where's that conflict centered, and what are the impacts, I guess, if we don't fix that or if it goes unchecked?
Well, it was interesting because you're right. More than half people said that there were conflicts because of the different points of view. And mostly senior management would like everybody to return to the office full time, and the employees don't want to. And oftentimes the internal communications people are in the middle of this, trying to do what management wants, but at the same time trying to keep morale high. So that's a bit of a challenge. And the issues that we found when we asked what are the issues that are creating these conflicts, it was about workload, salary, promotions, those kinds of things. And what we're seeing is that people who are working in the office have a little bit of resentment to people who are working from home because they have this feeling that they're not working as hard. And the people who are working at home, who are working just as hard, feel that they may be being left out in the promotions and the recognition area. And so I think those are the areas where companies have to come together and create some sort of expectations agreement or expectations level set of what is expected of an employee that works from home or remotely, and what's expected of people who work in the office. And so people will all be on the same page. And we saw some companies that have done very well in sort of establishing those guidelines, but many companies haven't. And I think it's because even though they know that this remote work is here to stay, almost everybody realizes it's here to stay. It's at 94% said it's in their long-term plans. People are still treating it as if it's temporary. So they haven't put any policies in place to monitor the productivity of their employees or to establish these guidelines so that people will all feel good about wherever they're working.
Yeah, right. And I'm, again, it just strikes me that some of this is your viewpoint generationally, right? I mean, I know when I was first coming into the workforce, yeah, I mean, there was always this emphasis on, you have to be seen, you have to be present, you have to be, near the power holders or the decision makers to really stand out and be promoted. And of course, we've turned that all on its head because so many of certainly are really across the spectrum, but a lot of our younger folks are working remotely. So,
and the irony of that, as I was speaking to a group of attorneys after the IABC conference about the same topic, and the irony is the senior people aren't coming into the office either. So if they're coming in, if the junior people are coming in to be mentored by them, they're not there. So it's sort of ironic that that's the way it is worked out. So I think if people expect the junior people to be there, then they need to be there as well.
Yeah. And are there any ways that organizations, through the report, I'm getting back to morale a little bit because, again, so many of us internal communications, that's sort of much of our focus is helping to create not just culture, but the sense of morale. Are there anything that organizations are doing to put that focus back on employee morale or strategies that they're using to try to get it to improve even in this sort of more hybrid environment?
Well, what we looked at were not exactly to improve morale, but to try to get people to come back into the office.
Okay.
And there was a long list of things that people are doing with free lunches and PTO and childcare. but it didn't appear that any of those were very effective. The one thing that seems to drive people to want to be in the office is relationships with their coworkers. Being together and being around the people that work with you seem to be the biggest motivator. So people will come in for meetings, for pitches, for creative sessions, for brainstorms. Those kinds of things seem to be the most effective in getting people in because they like working with other people. If it's just to come in and have a beer, free beer at the end of the day, that's not motivating anybody very much. And you saw it with Dell Computers recently. They told people if they didn't work from the office, they wouldn't be promoted. And the employees basically said, well, that's fine. We'd rather work from home than be promoted. So it was a move to get people to move back, and it backfired on them. So I think that this flexibility is a very important value that people have right now.
Yeah. No, I love where you're going there. I mean, as marketers, we're sort of wired to be collaborators in so many ways, right? And so you would hope that would be the driver to try to get people back in. But like you, I would notice agencies and things like that, at least in the early period post-pandemic, they would try to throw what I would call sort of goodies or favors at at employees, whether that be let's put another pool table in the break room,
exactly.
or let's add more beer on Fridays. But to your point, could we think a little bit deeper about sort of what are more intrinsic, drivers like collaboration and things like that? Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Good, terrific. Yeah, I thought that was also I'm glad you brought that up because I was flipping through some of the slides here, and that immediately drew my attention. Thinking about students and early career professionals, does this new approach to work widen the training and experience gap in the workforce? And if so, how do we help bridge that gap, both on the academic and also practitioner side of the equation?
That's one of the pitfalls of working from home that people bring up all the time. It's harder for younger workers to learn and be mentored and get the attention that they need and the awareness of their capabilities. And there's some truth to that, I think, because oftentimes when you're an intern or you're an entry-level employee, you gain a lot of value from being around people who have been there for a while. But when you talk to younger people, they still are not interested in working 5 days a week in the office. So I think two things have to happen. We have to develop an appreciation for that and not demand that they be in the office any more than anyone else. But secondly, it's the training and the collaboration aspect. We have to rethink how internal communications works and how training works and how collaboration works. Companies, if they don't have a new way to train people and get them involved in the corporate culture remotely, then they're going to have a tough time. The ones that are able to create the technology or the programs that engage people when they're working from outside are going to be the ones that are successful. It's not going to go back to the way it was. I'm certain of that. So we have to adapt our training and our culture building to this new reality. And I think that's where we have to look for new ideas.
Yeah, for sure. Great. And again, I really love how a lot of this report speaks to maybe the role that we as communicators can play, right? And I know that I was looking at the slide here, are there opportunities for communicators to expand their influence on corporate culture? And maybe if you could just speak to that just a little bit.
Well, we asked several questions of the internal communications folks on this note. And one, it was really encouraging that they feel like the move to remote and working from home has made their jobs more important, more respected, and they're being more engaged with senior management. So people are realizing that communications is the solution to this problem. And so that's really good. I think that many of them said that they felt a little overwhelmed by the amount of work that's involved nowadays and managing all of this because it's much more complicated than it used to be. But I think everyone is also encouraged that it's going to make their jobs more meaningful. And they're excited about the future and the role that communications will play in this finding a solution to this problem. And I think that it's good for our profession. It makes it more indispensable. And I think it gives us new challenges to work on in terms of sort of redefining the nature of corporate culture so that you can build culture with people who are not sitting right next to you every day.
Yeah. And, I would direct everybody to take a look at the summary of the report. And I know we're going to put that in the show notes. And IABC has been promoting it a bit on Catalyst and some of our platforms. And I know USC has as well. But I love the section at the end because you actually provide some recommendations and sort of some thought starters for communicators and anybody else interested in these topics. And a couple that jumped out at me, because along these same lines, we were talking about, how communicators can have an impact here. Create new opportunities to connect people and build relationships, right? And maybe I love the first sentence, we can work very efficiently on Teams and Zoom, and that saves time. However, culture is based on some of those deeper relationships. And, you would hope that as communicators, we ought to have a piece of that, correct?
Absolutely. And I think when I present this, some of these things sound like HR initiatives. But I think communications is the lead in this corporate culture, building the corporate culture. It's not just creating the policies, but it's how you communicate with one another when you're not sitting in the office that I think is the real challenge. And that's where we should be coming up with imaginative solutions. And there's a lot of things you can do to create opportunities to connect people and build relationships. The mentorship kind of programs become even more important than they ever were before. And I think a lot of companies have those, but they're not very proactive or very effective. Those can be great. The resource groups can be a huge connecting factor. And then there's things you can do, like companies are buying Spotify for all of their employees, and they're creating playlists and doing fun things with music across the company and finding ways that virtually they can get together, like you can do virtual activities that you might do, like you can go to a virtual escape room, which is an activity a lot of people do together, but you can do that without being in the same place. So I think if you're creative about how you use technology and how you link people together, you can find ways to build culture without having everybody in the same place.
Yeah. I think that's a great note to bring us to a conclusion on, because, we are going to have to get creative. You're absolutely right. I mean, this report found it. I've seen it in other places. Remote hybrid work is here to stay. The pandemic didn't end, and then we just all immediately went back to our old ways of working. That's just not going to happen. And so,
and there's another aspect of this. I think that the contact with senior management is a big issue in remote work. But if you think about during COVID, when we were all online, it was much easier to reach senior management than it was normally. So I suggest one of the things you do is have sort of office hours for the CEO. Spend an hour a week or 2 hours a week. It could be the time it takes to drive to work, to open your phone or your Zoom or your Teams to employees to talk to you and have them sign up and spend 20 minutes with an employee answering their questions on a one-to-one basis. Something like that sends a huge message. And you actually have the opportunity to spend more time with senior management than you did when you were in the office if you put these programs in place. And people appreciate that kind of access these days, and we can provide that.
Yeah, great. Well, hey, Fred, thank you for spending just a few minutes going over the report. And again, we've just this was top level, folks. We just sort of scratched the surface here. There's so much more if you dig into the report. So I would encourage everybody to go to the show notes and take a look at the summary there and dig deeper to get more into some of this information. So, Fred, we're going to conclude, as I know we like to do in this series with all of our guests. What gets you up in the morning these days?
My dogs. I have 2 one-year-old Bernese mountain dogs, and they wake me up every morning way too early. You might have heard them barking during this podcast.
Did not, but I plead guilty. I'm similarly afflicted, as we say. So, well, Fred, thank you very much for joining us again. We are so excited about this partnership that we've started between IABC and the USC Annenberg Center. You all do such important work in our profession, and just really appreciative of you and all of your staff and terrific folks there. Thank you for the help.
We feel the same way. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for listening to PodCatalyst, the official podcast of IABC. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Have a suggestion for a future episode? Send us a note at catalyst@iabc.com. To discover all IABC has to offer, visit our website at iabc.com. Until next time.